Hi, my name is Paul Deasy. This is my YouTube channel, Paul Deasy Gemstones, and this is lesson 1 of the Colored Gemstone Academy. What does it take to be a good gemologist? Now, before I get into that, I do realize I have the most hideous handwriting known to mankind, and just to prove it, I'm going to finish this thought up top before we start. If you want to get a hold of me, if you have some questions, something you want me to cover that we haven't covered in any of the gemstone classes, you can go on Facebook and look up Paul Deasy. That is my personal page. Or, see, notice the bad writing. Or Paul Deasy Gems, which is my my fan page or public page or whatever they call that. So that's how you can get a hold of me. Now, lesson 1, we're talking about what does it take to be a good gemologist. And before I get into all of that, I wanted to say something on a personal, passionate note. I think it's important that you get to visit a mine sometime in your life. A lot of people have no perspective about that. And even when I worked at shopping channels for the better part of 30 years, they would have graduate gemologists who would be their QA. The quality assurance in gemstones. And many of them had no idea what it was like to be at the mine. And even the Gemological Institute of America, again, the world's foremost authority on gems, knows really precious little about the nuts and bolts of mining and what those miners have to go through when you're going to that. So let me talk first about being at the mine. So what do you need to be a good gemologist? Well, first of all, you probably need to have a hat, because you're going to be in some of the most remote, and it's funny, gem mines are in the most difficult to reach terrain on planet Earth, so you're going to need plenty of shade. You're going to probably, I'm not going to show the brand name because they're not paying me, you're going to need some sunscreen. You will definitely need some boots, because you're going to be definitely off-road going to these places. And, of course, I knocked it over. You're going to need a spray bottle, and you're going to need a flashlight. Now, the spray bottle is because a lot of times, especially when you're looking at rough, it's difficult to see and it's dirty and dusty out there. So any good gemologist is going to bring a spray bottle so they can kind of squirt the rough and see what it looks like, because it sort of darkens. It makes it look like what it would be, like in the case of turquoise, what it's like after, what it would look like color-wise after it was stabilized, things like that. And then as far as the flashlight goes, again, looking at rough, I'm going to actually just show you a piece of rough Larimar, and I'm going to first turn off the lights. This might be a little weird, because otherwise you wouldn't see what I'm doing. To show you kind of the translucency of that Larimar, you need the flashlight in order to do that. It shows that the light can kind of pass through the stone. And it's really important for the faceted clear stones as well, to be able to see just if there are any imperfections or inclusions in there. So we'll put the lights back on, but that's kind of the essential equipment you'll need. But that's really not what this lesson is about, because I can lose the hat too. This lesson is really about what do you need to know to be a good gemologist. And it's a lot more than just the chemical composition of the stone or where it comes from. There's a lot more that goes into it than that. And I'm going to give you some real life examples that I went through. And I told you in my little introduction to this course and Meet the Instructor about the first lesson that I took from a continuing education course at the University of South Florida from the first female gemologist that the GIA ever had. We were in that class, and I'm going to talk about Afghanistan in the 1990s. We were in that class, and she asked all the people in the class, what do you think is one of the most difficult gems to get right now? And the prices of it are just going through the roof. And most of the people in the class, they would guess diamonds, rubies, emeralds, sapphires, the big 4 that everybody's heard of. And the answer to that was absolutely incorrect. She talked about Lapis Lazuli. Now, lapis famously comes from Afghanistan. And she said, do you know how they mine lapis in Afghanistan? And we're like, no, we don't know. So it's in the mountains of Afghanistan. It can be very, 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 very cold. They dig this rock out, and then they put it in a fire until it becomes really, really, really hot. And then they drop it into a mountain stream that's really, really, really cold. And the rock then splits, and it exposes the lapis that is within that rock. And at that time, we were not at war with Afghanistan or Iraq or any of that, but it was also a time when Russia was very involved in wars with Afghanistan. And she said, so the last place you want to be in a war-torn country is up in the hillside with a fire saying, shoot here, shoot here. And because of that, and also because of looting in some of the Afghanistan, the cost went through the roof. It was very difficult to get, and that's sort of that whole supply and demand. And I never forgot that lesson. But little did I know I would experience that lesson firsthand myself. So fast forward, I'm now at QVC. It is March of 2000, and QVC sent me on a mining trip to Tanzania, in a place called Arusha, outside of Arusha. First of all, I found out how difficult it was to get to this place. It was probably 30 kilometers from the town of Arusha, and it probably took us 2 hours by a four-wheel drive vehicle to get there. Just one of the, again, the most remote, difficult places to reach on Earth. So we did our filming in March of 2000. Okay, and everybody knows the story of Tanzanite and what a wonderful stone it is. April 23rd, so a month later, I go on the air with Tanzanite show on QVC. It was on Easter Sunday, and there were, I want to say, 3 hours of merchandise. We sold out of everything in 2 hours and 15 minutes and did like $2.4 million in that short period of time. The vendor, the stone supplier that paid for the trip, called me up and said, do you realize that when we did that show on QVC, and it took that much of the merchandise out of inventory for the rest of the world to use, the prices of the Tanzanite and the quality and sizes we were doing worldwide went up between 15 and 20%, just like that in 1 month. That shows you kind of the power of what we were doing on QVC. Now, continuing on the story, as I said, a real life example. September 11th, 2001. Of course, we all know that now as 9/11. And of course, that was a big deal, a terrorist attack on our home soil for the very first time. And about, what, 2 months later, in November 16 2001, the Wall Street Journal published an article with Daniel Pearl, and I forget who co-authored the piece with him. And it talked about the link between Tanzanite and terrorism. And it said that the Tanzanite that you got was probably in Mideast souks, which are like these markets out there. So when that came up, and this is going to blow your mind, it still blows my mind to this day. When that article came out, the gentleman who was the producer of the segment of the Tanzanite shows that I went to Tanzania to go film, he was going through the footage of the film that we shot, and he came to one area where we were passing a mine that said Camp Osama bin Laden. And so there it was, for, you know, kind of in our face. We never heard of that name before, and all of a sudden in the footage that we had edited and gone through, we saw that. So we showed that to our bosses at QVC. They immediately contacted the FBI. And next thing I know, my boss is telling me, you may have to be interviewed by some state officials from the Department of State or FBI. And I said, sure, you know, whatever it takes. So that was the Wall Street Journal article. So shortly after that, QVC announces they're not going to sell Tanzanite anymore until this all gets straightened out. Shortly after that, I think it was Zales followed suit, and then eventually HSN followed suit. So now, after going up in price, as it did when we had the show and sold so much of it, now there's a glut of it because everybody's afraid to buy it. The prices drop and it goes, you know, goes through the floor. And just to put sort of another fine point on that, January 23rd, and I'll never forget it. That was the day that Daniel Pearl, the one who wrote that article linking Tanzanite and terrorism, got kidnapped. And 9 days later, he was beheaded by the terrorists. So when I say you need to know more about what's happening in the world than just where the gem comes from, what's it made of, what's the hardness, what's the toughness, what's the stability, what's the refractive index, what's the sparkle, all of that's important, yes. But if you want to know when something's going to be a good time to buy or a bad time to buy, you need to really know what's going on geopolitically in the world. If for example, when shortly after that, I traveled to Australia, and we are at the opal mines in Australia. And the Australian opal mines are really, really remote. They're in the driest part of the driest state of the driest continent on Earth. And so dry, in fact, that you better have that hat I talked about, but you better have netting over it, because every fly within 1,000 yards is going to be coming to you because it wants the moisture from you. So again, it's really important to dress the part. But what I learned about that, the single biggest cost in certain mining operations, like in the opal fields of Australia or in the turquoise fields in the western part of the United States of America, fuel cost is the single most important thing. In fact, I was talking to Marty Colbaugh at the Kingman mine, and at one point he said his fuel cost every single month to run all the machinery and the equipment was in the neighborhood of $50,000 a month in fuel costs. All of that goes in to determining the price that I pay for the rough that comes out of the ground, and eventually what you pay to see that turquoise that you bought from the shopping channel or from anywhere, really. All of that goes in to what makes a gemstone a gemstone. So that is my lesson on what you need to know to be a good gemologist. And once again, if you missed my sort of introduction to this class, I talked about how you can take courses with the Gemological Institute of America if you want to learn more. But I'm going to cover a lot of different topics over the next probably 20 or 30 weeks. We'll drop one class a week. And all you have to do to become a part of that, remember, at the bottom of your screen you see subscribe. These courses are completely free. I'm doing that for you gratis. Just subscribe to the channel. And then at the top, if you click on that bell, it will give you the alert when the next class is coming out. So lesson 2 is going to be a history of gemstones in the world. And I find that to be one of the most fascinating. Where did the science of gemology even come from? So that'll be a week from today. I hope to see all of you there. Thank you so much for tuning in. Hi, I hope you enjoyed our first lesson in the Colored Gemstone Academy, which is the history of gemstones. But I always promised you I'm going to do something after each episode or each class to talk about either a gemstone or a particular mine that we visited. So right now we're going to introduce you to the wonderful world of Brazil. Here's a big geode. Here's a little smaller one that I can hold up to the camera so you can see that color. But I've always told you that some of these mining trips are in very, very remote locations. And one of the things I wanted to cover first is just the logistics of getting there and what you need to know and what you need to do before you even step on the plane. It's not like, hey, let's go to Brazil today. Number one, it takes a lot of planning. So first of all, you want to have, obviously, before you make all of your travel arrangements and everything else, who's going to pick you up on the other end? Is there somebody that needs, do you need an interpreter? For example, when we go to Brazil, it's Brazilian Portuguese. Mine's not that good. Do you need an interpreter for that? How do you physically get there? Are there shots that have to be taken? So let me take you through what Judy and I did. This would have been about 8 years ago when we went to Brazil. So number one, of course, everybody knows you're going to need a passport. Because you're traveling outside the United States of America, you're going to need a passport. And not only do you need a passport, it has to be up to date. Because they don't allow you to, you've probably seen this on cruise ships too, they don't allow you to enter a country if there's less than 6 months remaining on your passport. I know it's weird, you're thinking, well, wait a minute, I got 6 more months to go. So you need to make sure that that's up to date. Number two, certain places where you are traveling, you're going to need what's known as a visa specific to that country. So Judy and I have one for Brazil, we had one for Australia, we had one for China. I mean, not just Hong Kong, but China proper. And when you do that, it costs you money to do that. It takes time to do that. So if you don't have that visa well in advance of your trip, you got to make sure that you get one. In this case, we actually had to expedite it and pay extra money because the trip kind of came up last minute for us in that case. Now, something else that you're going to need. This is actually from the World Health Organization and Centers for Disease Control. There's certain places that you travel that you need to kind of get some sort of vaccinations. I know this is just a small part of that, but I believe for the purposes of going to Brazil, I believe it was yellow fever. So you have to get those vaccinations. And again, you have to do that well in advance because you can't get it the same day that you go because those vaccinations have to be able to get into your system, your bodies. All right, so now let's assume that you've done all that. You have your trip planned, and it is amazing. A lot of people think this is so exciting, it's exotic, you get to go to all these places. But let me tell you the real deal. So you got to get to the airport, and these days, 2 hours or 3 hours before you're going to fly. So our first leg of the flight is from Tampa International Airport to Miami, because Tampa does not go direct to Rio de Janeiro. So we had Tampa to Miami, that's about an hour. And you're gonna get about a 2-hour layover while you're waiting for your international flight to Rio de Janeiro. So by the time you take that, it's usually at night. And then you're gonna take a between 8 and 9 hour flight between Miami and Rio de Janeiro. And that means you're gonna get there sometime, let's call it 9 or 10 in the morning. So you've added another 8 to 9 hours onto your 3 or 4 that you had with your layover in Miami. And then you get there, you clear your customs. Hopefully you're getting by because I don't have an interpreter at that point, but we got through that just fine. Now we have a 6 to 8 hour layover in an airport where we don't speak the language, and we're waiting for a flight that we're going to take from Rio de Janeiro to Sao Paulo. Because don't forget, Rio de Janeiro is a nice tourist destination. It has beaches, it has Corcovado, the concrete Christ, all of those things that we were going to see later on in our trip, but we needed to get to the mines first. So after that 6 to 8 hour layover, we get on a plane. It's another hour or so to get to Sao Paulo. Now, Sao Paulo is a huge city. I mean, it's like you're looking at the most crowded part of New York City times 2, and that's Sao Paulo. And then we have a little bit of a layover there. About another hour, we stop at a place called Florianopolis. And Florianopolis is a smaller airport, but it's really kind of a touristy place. It'll be where people it'll be like the equivalent of having a home or a condo in Florida when you live in Minnesota. So Florianopolis was a little place. They dropped a few people off. And then we had the last part, at least the flight leg, from Florianopolis to a smaller, I think, I want to call it was Passo Fundo Airport, and that's where we got picked up by our contact who owned the factory in a place called Guarana. And that's and if you think of Brazil, which is the 5th largest country in the world by area, in the very south part of that is called Rio Grande do Sul, which is in the south. This is the southernmost part of Brazil, and that's where the mining for amethyst is. So we get picked up there. We have about another hour there by vehicle to get to the hotel where we're staying before we start our journey the next day. So long story short, you're around 25, 26, 27 hours all told, constant traveling before you set anywhere near where you want to go the next day. So it's what's the best way to tell you? You have to have a lot of stamina if you're going to visit a mine. Okay, so now it's the next day, and we're going to go to the mines. So we end up setting foot in the mines, and the first thing we do, and Judy has the camera, and we're outside of this area that they call Amethyst do Sul. So Amethyst do Sul is amethyst from the south, and that is where most of the Brazilian amethyst mines are. And the first thing that we recognize, and you're going to see this on the videotape I'm going to show you right now, it was unique in that this is the one area where they're mining. And if you take a look at all those little tailings, little brown spots in the green in the mountainside, that is all at about the same elevation. And what's below it is what they call the Swiss cheese highway that you're coming in on, because it literally, there's holes everywhere under the road. So they call that the Swiss cheese highway. One other thing that I did want to mention about going to the mines. I always say this, and it's really, really true. You learn something every single time you go to a mine, something that you thought you didn't know. The conventional wisdom, when you study all the books about gemstones and how they're treated, it will tell you that amethyst can be heat treated. And of course I thought that, and that's what I learned through the GIA and everything else, until I actually got to the mine. And you won't believe what I learned about whether amethyst is heated or not. Okay, so we saw the outside of the mine and where everything's at the same elevation. And now we're walking towards the entrance. And as you look at the entrance, you see this ventilation. So you see that ventilation up there? Well, the reason that you have that ventilation is because you're about to walk a quarter of a mile to a half a mile into a cave in the mountain. So you want to be able to breathe, and you don't want the air to get all stale in there. So we come to the moment of truth. Do you go forward? Are you going to go into the mine? Because it is not as easy as it might seem. There are certainly a lot of risks and dangers when you're going to enter the mine. But guess what? We've come this far. So let's all start heading into the mine. So as you enter the mine, and the temperature drops and it gets a little bit cooler, and we're all walking in towards, and of course you have your guides with you. And then you're going to get to, well, this is about the time where you see those signs that say danger. That sign you see there is written in Brazilian Portuguese, but it is saying danger. And it's right about this time that they start to tell us a story about how one of those other mines at that same elevation, about a week or two before we got there, had collapsed and people had died. Well, too far, we're in the midst of it right now. And then you start to see some of the promise, because I'm going to show you a little flashlight on a geode. I mean, that's absolutely gorgeous. It's pretty. And this is what you're looking for. And then we see where the mining operation is happening in earnest. And you're going to see maybe here, I don't know if I'll mute it for you or not, but they're taking a jackhammer to all of that rock that's in there. And what they're looking to do is they're trying to uncover a geode. And if they uncover that geode, here's where they're going to decide what to do with it. So we saw a geode that was exposed, and they drill a little bit of a hole in there, and they take a light at the end of a wire and they stick it inside. And what they're doing is they're peering inside to see what is the color of the material in that geode. If it is a beautiful, rich, dark purple, then they're going to cut that out by hand, and as many people as it takes to carry it, they're going to carry it out of the mine. If it's not great color, if it's a little bit pale, well, they're not going to use that for amethyst. They're going to use that to heat it, to change it into citrine. Remember I told you about, we thought all the amethyst was heat treated? It's really not. Most of the amethyst you see is a completely natural color. You can actually irradiate citrine to create an amethyst, but you heat amethyst to create a citrine. So that's what they did. So what you're seeing now is they are packing, they drill these holes all around the geode, because we don't want that one to be amethyst. So they're going to pack it with all this gunpowder, and that's what he's doing right now. You can see him filling and dropping the gunpowder into there. And then they're going to put some wires onto that, and we're going to walk 100 yards or so back towards the entrance of the mine, because we don't want to be anywhere near where the explosion is going off. So you're going to see as the guy with the wire comes with us, and he's going to touch those contacts together, and you're going to, well, you may not hear it, but there is not just a big boom underneath that ground. You can feel the concussion in your chest, and that's why Judy, who is holding the camera, you see it shaking a little bit, because you literally feel that concussion, and you're thinking, I hope we're not one of those mines that were collapsed upon like the one was 2 weeks ago. But we've gotten what we came for. So now you can see we're walking towards the entrance of the mine. So we're going to leave that mine, that amethyst mine, And the next step will be taking it to see where this amethyst gets processed to become jewelry or an ornamental piece of furniture. And that's what's coming next.